Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is The Bite Show. And I'm really happy tonight to bring Olaf Hage online here, and we've got a whole bag of secrets to talk about. News, news, news. News you might have missed, news they don't want you to hear, and all kinds of things. Very interesting stuff. Olaf Hage is in Brunswick, Maine, and his website is theTimeQuest.com. theTimeQuest.com. So go there and have a look. And a very interesting article came out in the wee hours of the morning, September 11th, on the Hage.com site over in Australia. U.S. oil royalties scandal. And boy, is this ever a scandal. Whoa, what a whopper. Olaf, what have you got to say about this?
Well, hi, Georgianne.
Hi.
This is an amazing story.
Yeah.
I don't think people have fully grasped yet the implications of this story.
Well, it's not out there yet. Unless you went to that website, I don't know of anybody that's been really talking about it.
Well, I did hear it on CBS radio. I don't know if they've done it on the TV news yet or anything like that. But according to the report, the U.S. Inspector General had discovered that there were, I think it's 19 employees of the Interior Department in its Mineral Resources Management branch, which I take it is according to the report, is the people who administer the oil and gas leases, the royalties from getting minerals and oil and gas from federal land. So now these are, when we talk about offshore leases, for example, the offshore drilling rigs, that they administer that. They administer, I suppose, if you find gold on federal land or anything like this, that comes under the Interior Department's stewardship, so to speak. Now, the way this is supposed to work is that you bid on these leases and you offer to pay, I assume, a higher and higher royalty against each other as you're bidding on these things, and whoever bids the most is the company that gets the lease, and then they're the ones who get to drill or mine on that particular piece of federal land. Now, federal land is owned by the American people.
You betcha.
It's our land. It's our oil. It's our gas.
That's right.
Our coal. It's our gold. It's our, I don't know, they're our periwinkles, whatever's there. Okay. It's our fir trees.
Right.
It's our rocks, our park benches, whatever it is. Our moose, Sarah. Hands off our mooses, Sarah.
Yeah.
If Sarah Palin wants to go hunting moose on our land, she has to have a permit because it's ours. It doesn't belong to some private person or something. This is federal land. And it goes for the oil and the gas and the polar bears and everything else there. It's owned by the American people. And we count on the Interior Department to protect our interests on it.
Well, Olaf, the American people should cease counting on anybody.
Yeah, it does look like they've got a problem here because according to the Inspector General, I think it's 19. In listening to the news report, I thought he said 19, but another report sounded like they were saying 13, so I'm not quite clear on the exact number here. I don't know if you have a more specific number, but at least a dozen, more than a dozen of these Interior Department employees were doing, guess what? They were receiving sex, drugs, bribes, gifts, and rock and roll from the oil companies and other companies that they were supposed to be administering. They were getting paid off here. I say bribes. It says gifts of money. Sounds like a bribe to me, but,
Yeah, well, that's exactly what it is. It's a bribe.
They didn't call it a bribe. I wonder how all of this stuff could not be considered a bribe. But anyway, supposedly, whether it's a bribe or not, they definitely were receiving stuff they shouldn't be getting. And these are the guys who were out there administering the oil and gas leases, including, as they say, on offshore drilling rigs as well as on the onshore drilling and leases on the land. So and remember, this is on federal land owned by the American people. This stuff indicates that we've got a major problem, because when you look at the price of oil, which is just nudging a little over $100 a barrel right now. It's hanging in there at the moment. It's fallen from $147 down to $100 a barrel, which, of course, I predicted would come back. But, we'll see if it stops here, because now the Saudis have stepped in and they said, well, we're going to cut back production 500,000 barrels a day to try to hold up the price. And they announced that, and the big hurricane was heading right toward the refineries in Texas. And the oil price kept falling. Now, is it that odd?
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe not if it's a manipulated oil market, because I took the trouble of doing a chart to see what was going on here, to see how the oil price was moving around. And I noticed that you could kind of see what we call in the stock market charting business a trough that is between the highs and the lows. You chart the high point, the low point, and then as it goes up, it comes down to the bottom of this trough, and then it bounces off, and it goes back up again, hits the top part, bounces off, comes back down. And as long as it's trading in a nice, rational way, a point here, 2 or 3 points there, up and down each day, and stays within the trough and goes up to the top of it and then back down to the bottom of it, that's a nice, rational market. In other words, a controlled market. A market that is operating not out of panic or wild-eyed speculation, as a recent report said and as I had assumed, but maybe a market that somebody is manipulating, a market that's been brought down to accumulate on the verge of another move upwards. So don't think that the next step down is $50 a barrel, folks. The next step may be $170. Depends on what these guys are really up to. The $100 point is near the bottom of this trend line. So if they go much below 100, if they go down to, say, 90, that would break through the bottom of that trough, bottom of that trend line. And if they go through the bottom there, then I would start looking for lower prices. But if they bounce, and you start seeing them bounce up above 110, 115 from the $100 or $97 level, then that would indicate to me that we're headed higher, not lower. So why are they doing that? What is the point of swinging wildly like this and taking us along on this roller coaster? And why do we have people being bribed who are out there, or, okay, I won't call it a bribe. Technically, the Inspector General said receiving gifts.
Oh, heck, Olaf.
Money.
That jerk was demanding oral sex.
Well.
And sniffing cocaine off of somebody's toaster oven. Oh, my God.
Let me say, if he's demanding sex,
yeah,
that would indicate that he thinks he's got some power. And what power does he have? He's controlling the royalties that the oil and gas companies have to pay. In charge of collecting that and reporting on how well they're doing and so forth. Well, this is a huge scandal. If these guys who are out there supposedly administering this can't be trusted, and clearly they can't be trusted, then that means that the fact that so many oil and gas leases onshore that are not being used but are being administered by these drug-sniffing, oral sex-demanding, money and gift-taking employees of the Interior Department, if these leases are not being exploited, and, of course, Congress has been demanding that the oil companies drill and on the leases they already have, but they're not doing it, then there's something rotten here. It means that they have the oil. They don't want to drill it. And there is a cozy relationship with the Interior Department that's overseeing this. And as a result, we have, in effect, handed these leases, these oil and gas resources, over to the oil companies, and they've locked them up in the ground and are refusing to bring it out. The whole purpose of the Interior Department leasing this stuff to them was to get that stuff out of the ground, not keep it in there. So what we're seeing here is a situation where the employees of the Interior Department apparently are being rewarded for not telling what's really going on in this story. Something's happening here. Now, I'm puzzled that the Inspector General suddenly discovered this.
Yeah, suddenly.
You have that many people doing that many things?
Yeah, before the election.
Yeah, it's such a key industry. We've been having problems here with oil and gas and all these issues for years, and the Inspector General just suddenly discovered this right before the election? Makes you wonder what's really going on. I think there's more to this story.
Oh, yes.
And I'll tell you something. If they're trying to drive the oil price higher and then bring it down and then drive it up again and so forth, and they've got a plan, they've got a price they want to take it to, they bring it down when things get a little shaky economically, when they're getting worried, that they've taken it too high too fast. So they bring it down and then they bring it back up again, and they kind of have this roller coaster thing going on with the price. They're headed somewhere. They have a goal in mind. Okay? Yeah. Now, the fact that the bottom of this trough came out around $100 a barrel is when I charted it, and we'll see if that's exactly what's going to take place here, may suggest that they want to say to people, gee, these wild gyrations up and down in the price of oil and natural gas, which is sort of tied to it, and other energy things which are tied to it, we can stop all of that. Gee, how can we do that? Well, if we could get a global agreement to fix the price of oil at, say, $100 a barrel, we'll all be happy. And then we'll drill on those federal oil leases that the Interior Department is regulating so badly. Then we'll go and give you the offshore oil and so forth. Once we get what we want, then we'll give you what you want. It's extortion, folks.
Yeah.
It is. Extortion, pure and simple.
You know, this investigation that they did, Olaf, it's 2 years old, and it's just now coming out. They interviewed 233 witnesses, and the documents are 470,000 pages.
That's a big investigation.
Oh, yes.
So they started this investigation 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That would be in 2006. And if they started in 2006, that's when the Republicans were still running Congress, wasn't it? Yeah. So does that mean the Republicans launched this investigation? And now the Democrats, who took control into early 2007, in January 2007, are taking credit for it? Or did the Democrats launch it? So we need to find out exactly when this was launched, whether it was actually Republicans in Congress who set this going or who set this going.
Yeah.
But that'd be very interesting. The fact that this stuff is not being drilled, that it's sitting in the ground, and that these guys are in control of it, and they're not doing their job. This is one of the things that Sarah Palin up in Alaska was looking at, was the oil companies were not doing what they were supposed to be doing as far as people of Alaska were concerned. And so this is the kind of thing that hopefully we will see some action on. Barack Obama seems to be indicating that he's going to go after the oil companies. Sarah Palin certainly has indicated she's willing to go after the oil companies. She already has. So maybe the jig is up here. Maybe these guys are saying, okay, we got you caught. And so they may try to whipsaw the price up and get it fixed before January, figuring that they're not going to have a friendly administration no matter who wins. So that could be what is behind this. They're trying to set this up. And I suspect that this thing with the Inspector General report on the Interior Department oil lease scandal, I suspect that this is just part of a much bigger problem.
Oh, yes.
So, and I'll tell you what the ultimate thing for me in this is. This is our oil and gas. They go out there, they pay a tiny little oil royalty lease to the Interior Department, to these people we were just talking about in the scandal here. They pay a tiny little royalty, and then they go out and they sell this oil for over $100 a barrel to us. The effective price at the pump is, I think, $168 a barrel or something like that. So, depending on, I guess it's fallen back a little bit from there. But these people have obviously got a racket going here. We need to reassess how we do these royalties and these leases so that if the price goes up, we get a bigger share of it. And then we can use that to offset the economic impact on people who have low incomes and so forth. And in particular, the diesel fuel for the trucking industry, which is the lifeblood of our economy. Those truckers need to be able to buy fuel at a price that's reasonable. Everything that moves by truck, every product in this country is going to be driven sky high in price by this sort of thing if we don't get control of the diesel fuel cost.
Yeah.
Not to mention heating oil. We've got a really cold winter apparently coming up, if we can believe Farmer's Almanac. I'll tell you, up here in Maine, we had a cold summer, except for a few days where we had a little period there of about, I'd say about a month, where we had thunderstorms every day and the temperature tried to get high, and we were just sitting on the edge of the thunderstorms all the time, which kept our temperatures lower than they would have been. So we were right on the edge of things. We set a record, by the way. So we know up here in Maine that something funny is going on with the climate. And there is a report out that the sunspots are at I won't say a record low, but they are not bouncing back like they normally do during the sunspot cycle. And we know that the temperatures of the outer planets are rising as well as they're getting brighter. And Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, Saturn, Neptune, even Pluto, all are warmer. And, of course, the Earth is warm. So I don't know if they've got measurements for Mercury and Venus. One of the problems with them is that the sunward side of those planets is one that we can't see without looking past the sun. And to measure the temperature of an object, you have to use very sensitive infrared detectors. And if you point those anywhere near the sun, you'll burn them right out. So it's hard for us to measure changes like this taking place on planets like Mercury and Venus that are between us and the sun. But the outer planets, where we can do this measurement without burning out the equipment, all of them are showing higher temperature readings as a result of apparently the solar activity since the 1970s. But the sunspot drop has suggested to some scientists, including Victor Herrera of Mexico. Dr. Herrera is predicting that the solar energy decline will cause a mini ice age starting within the next 30 years that may last another 60 years or so based upon his study of the sunspot cycles. So we're looking at potential here for a cooling period. Now, if we go back and look at the history of the solar activity, they can find a 40-year cycle of what we call the convection inside the sun, which circulates the heat from the core, where the fusion reaction is theoretically going on. And that convection cycle brings that heat from the core up to the surface of the sun where it radiates out, and we all hopefully get warm. Well, it turns out that the 40 years of warming is just about coming to an end, and we should be heading into a 40-year cooling phase. Well, if you go back historically and look, every 40 years you have a 40-year warming phase, 40-year cooling phase, and so on. And tied to this are, among other things, hurricanes. So the number of hurricanes and the severity of them is affected by this cycle as well. So there's a cycle of solar activity which is tied to all of this climate change. And last time I checked, I may be mistaken about this, Georgia, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there are any SUVs in the sun. In fact, I don't think there are any factories in the sun. I don't think that there are any oil refineries in the sun. I don't think there's any CO2 emissions from trucks or buses or planes or any of that stuff going on in the sun. That's not what's warming Mars or Jupiter or Saturn or Uranus or Neptune or Pluto. And this warming is apparently coming to an end. And, that record cold that they're predicting for this winter, well, I don't know if it will be a record cold, but extreme cold, they're saying, and strong snowfalls. I think that this may be the first sign that we're headed into the new 40-year cooling phase. Now, we could still have warm interludes here, and I know it's been really hot down in Texas and a number of places, but, all of this is part of the shift from one cycle to another. So we're going to have some sputtering back and forth probably for a few years as the convection cycle of the sun reverses. But as far as global warming is concerned, here in Maine, we're looking for a way to heat things up. So if you've got an SUV and you don't need it, bring it up to Maine and run it, and we'll be happy to take the CO2 because we could use the warming up here.
This Hurricane Ike, they said that it is 500 miles across. That's huge, Olaf.
Well, yeah. They think that there will be hurricane-force winds, I believe they said, 115 miles wide, which is a very large area. Of course, that these reports change from hour to hour as things fluctuate. They send new measurements back to the Weather Bureau to report on. But clearly, it's very big. Now, right now, it's centered in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, now one of the problems with that is, and we've seen this happen many times, is all of the outer bands of the hurricane are drawing up warmth from the waters of the Gulf and drawing up water into the storm. The minute those bands start to come over land anywhere, with Mexico or Texas, Louisiana, wherever, the minute those bands start passing over land, it's going to start weakening the storm. So they're saying it will be a Category 3 when it comes ashore. We'll see about that. They predicted, I remember Katrina was going to be a Category 5 when it came ashore, and then it was going to be a 4. And then finally, when it hit New Orleans, it was Category 3 or below. So it was falling dramatically as it was headed into shore because the outer bands were going over land. That was weakening the storm. It was cooling down. So let's pray that Hurricane Ike weakens as it heads into the shore. And
well, they're expecting a lot of wind and probably tornadoes as far north as Fort Smith.
Oh, absolutely.
Arkansas.
Even at a Category 3, this is still a very dangerous storm. It's going to cause a lot of damage.
Yes.
Flying areas, especially to the east of the eye, are going to be swept by the winds as they're coming around. We've got a full moon coming up here soon. I don't know the exact date of the full moon, but the moon is getting close to full right now. So when this hits, we're going to have the tidal effects of the moon as well, drawing the waters up. So this is a dangerous storm at a dangerous time of the month. And the areas to the east, which would be depending on the exact location of where it comes ashore.
The full moon's on the 15th.
Yeah, so that's Monday, but as you approach the full moon, the tides are getting higher.
Higher, yeah.
Yeah, so we're moving into this period here where we'll be about 3 days before the full moon, 2 days before the full moon. So that's obviously going to be a very treacherous condition. So we got a lot of ingredients in place here. I understand they expect Galveston Island to be completely underwater. So
yes.
Nobody should be staying in Galveston Island. And if that's 20 foot high, I believe is the highest point on the island, if your elevation above sea level is 20 feet, you're going to be underwater.
You're going to be dead.
Oh, yeah. And I know there are a lot of people who think it's a fun adventure to ride out a storm like this. I got news for you. You will probably not have safe drinking water if this floods out the mains. You've got to be careful here. The oil
yes.
shutting down, they're not taking any chances with this. There's a mandatory evacuation order for 4 counties. This is the kind of thing people need to get out of the way of. Not the last storm. We'll be having more storms like this. You don't want to mess with these things. Let's pray that it's not as bad as they're forecasting. But if it is, then a lot of people are going to be in danger here. And I understand the biggest problem is the gas stations are shutting down. The gas station owners are just leaving. The gas pumps are empty. The refineries are shutting down. When you drive, what you need to do is to drive slowly so that your gas will last longer. People are tromping on the gas pedal and accelerating and patching out and so on because they're in a panic. Don't do that. That'll use up what little gas you've got in your tank. You want to drive as slowly and smoothly as possible. They say the rule is drive as if there's an egg underneath of your foot on the accelerator pedal. Accelerate slowly. Don't drive too fast. If you're going to be sitting idle, turn the engine off and let it rest until you are sure you're going to be moving again. These are things that will help you to keep going. And do not, whatever you do, step on the gas pedal and rev up your engine. That's a really bad idea. All these things will use up your gas, and you have a hard time getting away. When you get into these situations, it's always best, if you see a storm is coming, go fill up the tank of your vehicles. Get even some spare gas if you need it, but make sure that the car you're choosing to leave in is the car that has the best mileage on it, the most gas in the tank. There are a lot of things that people can do here to make things safer. The thing I think they should be doing, of course, as I've said a number of times, don't live near these areas.
Yes, that's right.
Don't just leave for the moment. Use this as an opportunity to go house hunting somewhere else.
Yeah.
An opportunity to see if there are jobs available elsewhere. Get away from these places permanently. You shouldn't be living in this day and age with all these climate change problems, with the possibility of Mars coming by, which we'll get into in a moment here. You should not be living in low-lying areas. That's the most dangerous thing you can be doing. All these things that these people are going through, they don't have to go through this. I mean, yes, we have tornadoes in Kansas, but you don't have hurricanes. You don't have tidal waves in Kansas. I mean, let me put it another way. If you have a tidal wave in Kansas, you are not going to survive anywhere. Okay? If you have a tidal wave that far inland and that high in elevation, then the world is in super, super trouble. So, think about moving to high ground. Think about moving inland. I consider a hurricane God's way of telling you it's time to move. Okay? These things are a warning.
Well, Olaf, the local casters here, there's a lot of talk about horrendous spin-offs of tornadoes. There could be hundreds and hundreds of tornadoes spawned by this storm.
Well, that is typical for hurricanes. They often cause tornadoes, and a lot of the damage that you see after a hurricane was actually caused by a tornado that the hurricane created. So, these are very dangerous. Now, we just had a hurricane go over the state of Florida 5 times. One hurricane crisscrossed Florida 5 times, back and forth, wandering around over the state. What does God have to do to tell you to leave? During the last ice age, much of Florida was underwater.
Yeah.
At one point, because of the, it was larger, but there was a point where there was a flood event, and Florida had a lot of flooding along the coastal areas. We know that with global warming or ice caps melting or all of the things that may be happening during the climate changes, that Florida is going to be in danger. I think the highest place of the whole state is, 400 feet or something? Maybe not that high. So, and everybody in Florida can't fit on that little hill. So Florida is one of these states that people, if you're living in Florida, you need to think really seriously about whether this is a long-term viable place to be. There are other places to live. And I know people love the lifestyle, having the ocean out there. When's the last time you actually went out into the ocean? Realize that 90% of the people who live in Florida never go to the ocean?
Yeah.
Are you there just for the giant palmetto bugs?
Oh,
what is the attraction? Are you there because of Disney World? How many times have you been to Disney World? And by the way, they let non-Florida residents into Disney World. I heard it for a fact. You know, you don't have to be a resident of Florida to go there. How many times have you been there? Living in Florida has some advantages, yes. But there are other places where you can get most, if not all, of those advantages. You can still go to Disney World if you live up in Georgia. You can still go to the seacoast occasionally. How often do you go there? You can go there from some other locale. There's some lovely places in North Carolina that are to the western part of the state, and other areas that are up off of the flat.
People know that, Olaf. They live where they live because they want to live there for the most part.
No, I understand that.
So let's move on.
I think that people need to be concerned about this. The water is coming, and it may be from something else. I've got a CD that I offer called Is Mars Coming? It's not for sale. You get it by subscribing to my CDs, and we have that offer, of course, that we've mentioned a number of times. Each of the CDs has 12 hours of files, including material about Mars. I've made sure that just about every CD we put out has something about Mars on it, or something related to that subject. And I have said since 1997 that there is the potential for one of these objects outside the outer limits of the solar system called the Kuiper Belt. I didn't know that there was a Kuiper Belt at the time back in 1997, but I've said that there is a danger that not just little comets and asteroids, which can do a lot of damage, ask the dinosaurs, but objects bigger than that, objects big enough to kill a planet, objects that are moon-sized are out there in the outer reaches of the solar system. Let's cover the size of these objects so you understand the class here. Comets can kill a lot of people, millions of people, even wipe out whole species on the Earth. And they run in size from about anywhere under a mile on up to maybe 25 miles in diameter. That's Hale-Bopp. It's one of the biggest comets we've ever seen. Above that are asteroids. And asteroids can go from comet size all the way up to about 400 miles in diameter. And then we have Kuiper Belt objects. And Kuiper Belt objects can range as large as Pluto or the moon, because our moon is bigger than Pluto. In other words, moon-sized or planet-sized objects. So they could be smaller, but they can get that big, and there may be even bigger ones out there. There is an object beyond the Kuiper Belt called Sedna, which is believed to be as big as Mars. And let me tell you something. If an object the size of our moon were to hit the Earth, you don't have to worry about whether you're living in Florida or Kansas or anywhere else. We all die. Okay, that would sterilize the planet. Okay, objects of that category are planet killers, and I do mean killers. I don't even think the cockroaches would survive that. Yeah, you'd have to be really deep down the bottom of the ocean near some kind of thermal vent to survive that kind of thing. But you'd be really odd-looking if you were there. So we're looking at objects that are very dangerous, okay, if they come into the solar system. I had looked at some biblical prophecy, and I had been in particular interested in the one about the days being cut short. And I discovered as I studied this subject that it was actually talking about the length of each day being shortened. In other words, shrinking the day from 24 hours to something shorter than 24 hours, which would mean the Earth would have to spin faster on its axis. Technically, in the book of Revelation, the indication is a 50% faster spin rate in order to cut short the day by a third of the day and a third of the night taken away in Revelation 8. Well, if that were to happen, you would have to have a really large body either hit the Earth or come very close to the Earth. Now, I looked into the scenario of an impact, and although I held on to that idea for about 17 years, I was forced to discard it in 1997 because people kept asking me, well, where's the safe place? And after an impact big enough to spin up the Earth's rotation that much, I couldn't find a safe place. And yet the Bible indicates that at least two-thirds of the population would survive not only the impact, or if you will, the event that spun up the Earth's rotation, but the events that followed it, including wars and famines and various other things and quakes that would follow it. So if most people survive it, that can't be how the Earth's rotation rate gets spun up faster. It must be something else, and that something else would have to be a massive body, a planet-sized body, moving close to the Earth, very close to the Earth. Well, if you look out in the solar system, all of the planet-sized bodies out there are either horrendously large, like Uranus and Neptune and Jupiter and Saturn, and locked into very stable orbits, or you'd have to be looking at something like Mars or something from the Kuiper Belt so big and so dark that we can't see it. Okay, now, so I looked at Mars, and as I studied the prophecies, I found that there were actually a very large number of prophecies about Mars in the Bible, but they didn't call it Mars. They called it other things. Mars was called, by the Romans, it was called Tyre, as well as Mars. The Greeks called it Ares. It's sometimes called Haman in the Hebrew. It's called by a variety of different names in the ancient world and in the Bible. And by tracking down what some of these other names were and understanding the associations, I was able to reconstruct a theory, a story, if you will, about how you could have the events that were prophesied come true if Mars were to somehow or other be brought closer to the Earth. Now, there has been a study done by some planetary scientists showing that two planets in our solar system are in very unstable orbits. One of them is Mercury. The other is Mars. Mars has not always been where we now see it. It's been disturbed, as has Mercury. And if you look at the history of Mars, you realize there's a lot of legend, a lot of tradition that says that it has been in the past perilously close to the Earth for whatever reasons, okay? Now, some people dismiss these and say, well, they're just legends. It's just mythology. You don't have to believe it. It's just poetry. It's not real. They saw a little speck of red light in the sky, Mars, and they got terrified by it because they were superstitious people. Don't pay any attention. Nothing going on here. Keep moving. Wait a minute. Not so fast. I think there's something wrong with this picture. I think that all these different civilizations and all these different cultures that had traditions of Mars coming close to the Earth and causing damage, I don't think they were all superstitious idiots. I think they actually saw Mars up close and personal. Some of them describe it as having two moons, two steeds, as they were called by the Greeks. How did they know that? We didn't discover them until, I think it was 1877. So maybe Mars was a lot closer in the past. Maybe it could get close again, and maybe it wouldn't take a whole lot to do that. Mars is 1/9 the mass of the Earth. If it got hit by something head-on, by a retrograde object, an object like a comet or maybe a Kuiper Belt object coming in the wrong direction and hitting it in the direction that it's orbiting the Sun, so that it slows it down, so that it would fall in toward the Sun and come by the Earth, maybe we could see the planet Mars pay us a visit again. So, given that idea, I postulated the existence of a group of objects, moon-sized or bigger, that would be located somewhere, since we didn't see them inside the solar system, somewhere just outside the solar system, in erratic orbits, unpredictable orbits, and some of them coming into the solar system periodically, some of them perhaps captured as moons by the outer planets, some of them hitting the planets, and in retrograde orbits. Well, I have news for you tonight. They found one. They found a Kuiper Belt object in a retrograde orbit.
Oh, my goodness.
Vehicle out there.
Yeah.
It is called 2008. That's the year it was discovered. KV-42. It has been nicknamed DRAC, D-R-A-C, short for Dracula. because the story goes that Dracula could climb a wall, could, if you will, defy gravity, go in the wrong direction. So they called this thing Drac for short. Now, Drac was discovered by a team at the University of British Columbia in Canada, led by Dr. Brent Gladman. Dr. Gladman's team made this discovery back in May, and they've been calculating the orbit and trying to figure out exactly what they were dealing with. They have recently, it was reported on September 5th at the universetoday.com website that they have calculated the orbit to be from the planet Uranus's orbit, that's inside the solar system, folks, out deep into the Kuiper Belt beyond Neptune. So this is an object that comes inside the solar system as close as the orbit of Neptune, and then goes back out into the Kuiper Belt, where, of course, is crossing a lot of other orbits in the process. And this object is in a retrograde orbit where it's going in the wrong way. So, I mean, it could bump into something like, well, I don't know, Neptune. It could make a close approach to some object, you see. So this is an errant object. Well, they say it's in a fairly stable orbit. They're confident that it's not going to bump into anything. They think it's fairly stable, but they say it could get influenced by the gravity of other objects and could change its orbit at some point. But at the moment, it looks stable, and it looks like it's been there a long time. That's their evaluation. They've only had a few months of observation, okay? However, this object, the orbit goes from 20 astronomical units out to 70 astronomical units, okay? That's a pretty elliptical orbit, okay? And they think this object is about 50 kilometers in diameter, or about 30 miles in diameter. That would make it bigger than Hale-Bopp. Now, you may say, well, Hale-Bopp was 25 miles in diameter. This object is 30 miles in diameter. That's only a little bit bigger. Sorry, that's not the way diameter works in the mass department. A little bit larger diameter means a substantial increase in mass. This thing is 20% more, is 20% wider than Hale-Bopp, but it could be as much as twice as massive, depending upon various factors. It's a much bigger object. Now, Hale-Bopp, one of the largest comets we've ever seen, could kill a lot of people if it hits you. This thing is a much bigger threat, but it's in a stable orbit. It's not a circular orbit, but they think that it's going to be safe out there. Well, they don't come in one object pairs, okay? I mean, in other words, what I'm saying is if there's one object just happens to come into the orbit of the planet Uranus, which is tilted over on its side, its north pole is aimed at our equator, or a little below it, okay? It's got a tilt of over 90 degrees, 98 degrees, I think it is. So the planet Uranus, which is 14 and a half times as massive as the Earth, that's big, folks, 14 and a half times as big as we are. If the planet Uranus is knocked over on its side, and we've got this erratic Kuiper Belt object that comes in its orbit to the planet Uranus's orbit, that suggests to me, at least, that it may be in some way a remnant of whatever it was that knocked Uranus over on its side. We're talking about a past planetary cataclysm that Drac apparently had something to do with. Now, what it was, I don't know. But I don't think Drac, at 30 miles in diameter, is big enough to have turned the planet Uranus, which is 14 and a half times as massive as the Earth. You put 14 and a half Earths on one end of a teeter-totter and the planet Uranus on the other, it would balance, okay? I don't think this little 30-mile diameter object is the object that knocked Uranus over onto its side. Something a lot bigger did that. And whatever that thing is, we don't know where it is. It's missing. We don't know what happened to it.
Maybe that's the rings of Saturn.
No, the rings of Saturn are made up of some fairly small moons that got too close to the Saturn. Okay, you're talking about an object here that had to be planet-sized to knock Uranus over like that. Something really big had to be involved here. You have to have a very substantial object come by Uranus. And probably, I'm guessing, I could be mistaken here, but it probably had a strong magnetic field. Whatever it was, it caused this huge disturbance to that planet. Now, that's the next planet out from Saturn, which is the next planet out from Jupiter, which is the next planet out from Mars, which is the next planet out from us. So we're a few little jumps out here. But whatever that cataclysm was, it was one of the biggest in the solar system's history. And whatever caused it must have been substantial in size. So we now have, if you will, a clue. Drac is a clue to the existence of another body out there, a body that was involved in turning Uranus over on its side. Whatever that body is, Drac comes from the Kuiper Belt. There should be something else out there, something big enough to have caused this problem. And if Drac is in a retrograde orbit, maybe this other thing is too. So we've got some large objects out there, something obviously at least 1,000 miles in diameter, something on that scale or bigger would have to be involved here. Maybe it hit Uranus, and maybe it's been swallowed up in Uranus. Maybe, part of the mass of Uranus is this object that hit it. I don't know. But something big was involved, and Drac is a clue that it may have come from the Kuiper Belt. So we now have a new report here that's telling us that we are on the verge of having scientific information to confirm the idea that there are not only more than one retrograde object in the Kuiper Belt, but also that they may be very large objects, and that if there are large retrograde objects out there in highly elliptical orbits, Uranus may not be the only stopping point inside the solar system for them. We now have, I believe, at least 8 objects from the Kuiper Belt that enter inside the orbit of Neptune. At least 8 of them. And there may be still more, probably are. We're finding these things inside of Neptune. There can be others outside that have orbits that carry them inside. Now, some comets have orbits that last thousands of years, which means, for example, Hale-Bopp, I think, had an orbit that was 4,000 years. So these objects can have very substantially long intervals between their visitations. And you'll recall the Mayan prophecy story, the idea that the Mayan calendar predicts that something's going to happen in December 21st of 2012, and they say that their calendar comes to an end. Listen, folks, their calendar is based upon counting out planetary cycles, specifically the cycles of Venus relative to the Earth. Now, if their calendar cycle comes to an end in 2012, that suggests to me that some planetary cycle affecting Venus and the Earth is expected to be changed then. And that implies that something's going to disturb the orbits of Earth and Venus, meaning an object that must be pretty big coming in after a very long interval. Their calendar count, I think, started in 3113 BC or something. So that's a, 5,000 or plus cycle? What kind of object are we talking about? If that object is that long in its cycle that it goes out into the Kuiper Belt, maybe beyond, if it's big enough to disturb planets, we're talking about an object like Drac, but much bigger and on a much more, if you will, dangerous orbit.
That's scary. Oh, gee.
Okay. But fortunately, I believe that Bible prophecy indicates that this object is going to run into something on its way into the solar system. Instead of threatening the Earth and Venus, it's going to hit Mars. And the rest of the story about that, we've got on the audio tape is Mars Coming, and also on our CD sets. So it's a long story. It's a lot of technical stuff and detailed prophecies to go through. But that's the big picture. And there is a possibility. Now, I'm not saying that this thing is going to hit the Earth. I'm not saying that Mars is going to hit the Earth. And I'm not saying that we're going to be in danger on December 21st of 2012. But maybe later, because if Mars is hit, and if it begins to change its orbit, and if it starts coming close to the Earth, you should keep something in mind. Mars has 9 times the mass of the Moon. If the lunar tide can cause the kind of problems that we see and make hurricanes worse, then imagine what an object 9 times as massive as the Moon would do if it got as close to us as the Moon, which is 250,000 miles away.
Well, what does Scripture say about the roaring of the seas?
Yeah, it happens. There's a specific prophecy in Luke 21, which I've talked about many times over the years. In Luke 21, in the Greek text, it has Jesus saying that men's hearts will be failing them for fear of what is coming upon the earth. But if you look at the way the Greek is phrased, I pointed out that you could be translated for fear coming upon the earth. Now, that sounds a little odd until you realize the word they're translating as fear is the Greek word phobos, which is...
Yeah, well, Olaf, in some of the translations, they say fear and terror. They use the words demos and phobos.
Well, I don't see the word terror in that text, but I do see the word fear in that text, which is phobos, which is one of the larger of the 2 moons of Mars. Now, it's only 10 miles long, and its longest is sort of potato shaped, so its longest axis is 10 miles, and it's more like 5 miles in its narrowest side. But still, this object is something that, for it to get here, you would have to bring Mars here. Now, I know there's some people who think that, well, something could knock Phobos out of orbit of Mars and bring it to the Earth and so forth. These are people who read my original theories about this and have modified them with their own theories, okay? You're looking at secondhand ideas there. But the original basis of it is because there are statements in the Bible that the planet of the fallen angels, which according to Jewish legend tradition is the planet Mars, that planet will be no more. That something's going to happen to it. So I don't think it's just Phobos getting knocked out of orbit. I think it's the whole planet that is changed, the whole planet dragging Phobos and Deimos with it. When that comes by the Earth, in order to spin up the rotation of the Earth, Phobos won't do that, you see. In order to spin up the rotation of the Earth, Phobos is too small. You need something as big as Mars, something along that size, a planet or certainly moon-sized object, something that could raise a tide, a substantial tide. An object that big could then speed up the rotation of the Earth. And when it gets close enough to do that, to fulfill all of those prophecies, I think there's something like, there's more than a dozen books of the Bible that make this prophecy. If that were to happen, Florida will be entirely underwater. Houston will be entirely underwater. Much of lower Texas, lower Louisiana, lower Georgia, lower Alabama, lower Mississippi, and a lot of other places around the world, the Netherlands, you name it, these places will be entirely underwater. Okay? New York City, Manhattan Island, entirely underwater. Long Island, entirely underwater. Parts of the coast of Maine, entirely underwater. Parts of the seacoast of all of the places of the world, entirely underwater. These are very dangerous conditions. Hurricanes are a gentle nudge from God telling you to leave these low-lying areas permanently. Get away from these areas. Now, you got till maybe 2012, the end of 2012, but by then, folks, real estate on high ground, opportunities to get homes and land and to get away and so forth, people will be getting really scared. I'm telling you, don't wait. You don't need to wait. You've got plenty of warnings here about climate change. You've got plenty of warnings about really dangerous hurricanes. You've got plenty of warnings about tsunamis. We got this Canary Island landslide potential of the volcano down there in the Canary Islands, which could trigger a tidal wave sweeping across the east coast of the United States and South America and a lot of islands, Cuba and so forth. And believe me, there's more than one way to skin this cat. There's a lot of danger out there. And I know people are thinking, well, it hasn't bothered, it's been there for thousands of years and nothing has happened and so forth and so on. Not true. Lots of things have happened over the past several thousand years. There have been lots of things that have gone wrong. We just had a tsunami sweep into Indonesia back in 2004 in December. And by the way, that was almost exactly 8 years to the day before the Mayan calendar ends. Oh, just a coincidence, you say. Well, maybe, but maybe not. Because just a few days before the tsunami hit, there was a huge undersea volcanic eruption between Australia and Antarctica, one of the biggest earthquakes we've ever recorded on the planet. And that quake was exactly 8 years before the Mayan calendar ends. So I think there's something going on here, and I think we need to pay attention to it. Look, with the Internet, you can get a business online. People say, well, if I move to a rural place, I have to take a cut in income. Trust me, the cost of living in these rural areas is way, way, way below what it is in these big city areas. You can get a small room that you buy in a condo, a one-room studio apartment for $1 million in some of these big city areas that are going to be underwater if this happens. And for that kind of money, my goodness, you could buy a huge estate in a rural area. So people need to think carefully here about these decisions, of course. But my goodness, when I first brought this idea to the public's attention all those years ago, we didn't know that there were retrograde objects. There hadn't been a confirmation that some of the planets, the outer planets of the solar system, had captured Kuiper Belt objects as moons. We didn't know that there would be so many large objects found in the Kuiper Belt, objects big enough to do what I'm suggesting. And we didn't have this confirmation, which we got in June of this year, where JPL and NASA scientists in the British journal Nature announced that there was evidence to show that a Kuiper Belt object 1,000 miles or larger in diameter had struck the planet Mars already, according to their reports in the last month of June in the British journal Nature. That's the issue you want to look at there, the final issue for June. Now, if those guys are right, we've already had the scenario I'm talking about. And you know what? They said that event had driven off an ocean from Mars, had driven off its atmosphere, and tilted its axis 90 degrees, exactly what I had said a decade ago. So, look, the predictions I've been making about this subject have been confirmed by scientific findings and discoveries since then, point by point by point. Now, you can keep waiting, and I don't know what confirmations you're waiting for. I think people are waiting for the announcement. Now we've found an object that's headed right toward Mars or into the inner solar system that's, several hundred kilometers in diameter. When you hear that report, I assure you the cost of land in these rural areas will go sky high, because suddenly people will say, uh-oh, I want to get away from the ocean, because you know why? 75% of the planet Earth is covered with water. Most of that is your ocean basins. The Mediterranean Sea is a drop in the bucket compared to the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian and other oceans. The chances are, if anything hit the Earth, it's going to hit in the water. That's going to cause a massive tidal wave. And I assure you, Canary Island events, tidal waves from undersea volcanoes, and earthquakes that will erupt after that will add to it. You're going to be flooded all over the world. Even if it hits the Pacific, the disturbance to the Earth will be so great that it will trigger undersea quakes, and it'll trigger the Canary Island collapse. It'll trigger all of this stuff to happen, and you'll see all kinds of devastation. So don't wait. Don't think that you could just sit around and wait until they discover the object on its way into the solar system. This discovery of DRAC this year is a warning that these objects are out there, as I suggested they would be, so we're getting closer and closer here. Each new discovery is confirming yet another part of the scenario. There's really very little left now but to find the object itself. We've confirmed there are objects coming into the solar system, that they've been captured by moons, that they've hit the planets, including Mars, as I'm saying will happen again here, and that these objects are very large, including the ones that come deep into the solar system, and that they can be in retrograde orbits. So all of the ingredients are out there. All of these things have now been confirmed, except for the final part of the thesis. So this is something that we should, in fact, look at as a serious matter. And we're going to need to have, I hate to say it, but you need to have leaders who have, as you go to the elections, who have the qualifications and the expertise, the experience, the wisdom to do the right thing when we see these things coming upon us. Because, they're going to have to give those mandatory evacuation orders, not just for a storm, not just for a day, but more or less permanently, because the devastation is going to be enormous if this sort of thing were to take place. We have evidence of past upheavals, not very far in the past, the Dark Ages now, according to an Australian scientist astronomer, may have been caused by a comet that broke up and hit in the Atlantic Ocean and triggered several years of famine and caused the collapse of civilization in Europe and a lot of other bad things to happen back around the year 540 AD, which is not that far back. AD 540 for you, Loma Linda there, as Rush would say. But, that's not very far back. That's since Jesus. That's since Julius Caesar, since the Council of Nicaea. The days of Justinian, at the beginning of the Dark Ages, just before the Middle Ages and those events, and just before Islam arose. Some people think that this could have triggered the events that eventually led to the rise of Islam. So, when something like this happens, it causes great devastation of the world, and one of the side effects, very possibly, may have been the beginning of the bubonic plague period, because right after that, the plague broke out. So when you look at the biblical prophecies, what is one of the things they mention happening right after this event? They mention that plagues will be breaking out, that there will be famines and plagues. So clearly, you change the climate, you have these kinds of upheavals. Something very similar to this started the Dark Ages, and yet it was a much smaller object that broke up and crashed into the Atlantic Ocean and several pieces, and one of them fell into the North Sea, or the Irish Sea, I should say, according to the report. So we have lots of evidence these things happen, and lots of evidence that they could happen again. We have, speaking of our leadership, there's some interesting stuff coming out now about some of the candidates we don't want to pass up. They've been dismissing Sarah Palin, but I found out that she was chairman of the Alaskan State Commission on Oil and Gas Resources. So she had other statewide experience, not just being governor, and in addition to being mayor and city commissioner and so forth, and PTA work and so on, she also ran a small business. So she has experience running a business in the private sector as well. So she's not as inexperienced as they're trying to make you think. So I don't think we would be in bad hands with Sarah Palin if she happened to end up as President of the United States. On the other hand, what about Barack Obama? I understand there's some new reports out about what's going on with Barack Obama. The story is that he's been served papers, court papers, in connection with, and so is the Democrat National Committee, in connection with his citizenship.
Right.
Demanding that he prove it. Do you have additional information on that?
Not at hand, but it took a very brave guy to do this. I really commend his
Yeah, there's a
action.
lawyer named Berg in Philadelphia who got an anonymous call. At least he's not telling us who called him, telling him about Barack Obama's background and that he ought to go investigate it. Now, this was before the convention, when Hillary Clinton had not yet released her delegates. So before you jump to the conclusion that it was the Republicans who called him, this guy was a Democrat. He had run for governor on the Democrat ticket in the preceding year. So this is a prominent Democrat in Pennsylvania, a Philadelphia lawyer, and he's the guy behind filing these papers. So this is not coming from the Republican side so far as we can tell. But he won't reveal the identity of the person who called him that started this, all right? However, he pointed out that there's a little legal thing that he discovered. I don't know if the caller told him this or if he found it out, but in 1940 a law was passed that says that if you're out of the country and if you have some problem with your citizenship and you have to go, if you're growing up in the country and so forth, and you have to make a choice as to what country you're going to be a citizen of. I dated a girl back when I was in high school and college who had been born in Brazil of American parents. And when she came to be 21, she had to make a choice as to who she would be a citizen of, Brazil or the United States. And so she had to go and swear an oath of allegiance in a court or in an embassy or whatever, wherever she was at the time, in order to get her American citizenship. Well, there is no record that anybody's found so far. Now, she may have done it, but there's no record that has been found so far that Barack Obama did that when he became 21 because he was under this law. He had to do that in order to secure his American citizenship. If he failed to do that, then he would not be qualified to be President of the United States, and that brings Hillary Clinton back into the picture again, as also Al Gore, by the way. So there is another report, which I heard, now I must admit, this was the Bill Cunningham show, and a caller called in and said that this Philadelphia attorney had said this, and I kind of remember him saying something like this, but I'm not sure about the details. But according to the caller, when Barack Obama was age 21, someone named Barack Obama, maybe him, maybe somebody with the exact same name, also living in Indonesia, who knows, but anyway, a guy traveling under an Indonesian passport when Barack Obama was 21, who called himself Barack Obama, who said he was a Muslim on his passport, went to Afghanistan. Now, that would be 1982. And as I recall, in 1982, the Mujahideen was fighting the Soviets, and so the Muslims were, if you will, on our side at the time, or we were on their side. And if this guy named Barack Obama went to Afghanistan at that time, he would have been, I assume, meeting with people like, well, Osama bin Laden and the head of the Taliban and other people who we were trying to contact at the time. So there's a question as to what this other Osama bin Laden was doing. You know what this reminds me of? Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald. There were multiple Lee Harvey Oswalds. There were at least two, because there was another guy calling himself Lee Harvey Oswald who was going out to shooting ranges at the same time the real Lee Harvey Oswald was in another spot before the Kennedy assassination. Weird stuff going on. Multiple Lee Harvey Oswalds. And we know that Lee Harvey Oswald, at one point at least, was working for the CIA. Makes you wonder. You know, the CIA apparently was in contact with the Muslims in Afghanistan who were fighting the Soviets. So could it be that somebody was using using Barack Obama's name and traveling to Afghanistan as a supposed Muslim citizen of Indonesia back in 1982? Or was that Barack Obama? Makes you wonder, you know? inquiring minds want to know what was going on. So, I don't know. I heard that on the Bill Cunningham show. For what it's worth, it may be worth nothing. Maybe the guy misheard the information. Maybe I misheard it. But it's one of these questions. And frankly, I don't want the next president of the United States, who will be president in 2012 when Phobos or Mars or Jack and the Beanstalk comes calling, I don't want that president to have so many question marks. I'd like to know who we're electing.
You know, Olaf, there's a guy, he's a very much loved broadcaster, Terry Anderson. He's a black man in Los Angeles. He has a talk radio show. And he recently went down a list of things about Obama that Obama has said that aren't exactly correct. For example, Obama says his father was a goat herder, and the talk show host Terry Anderson says not exactly. He was a privileged, well-educated youth who went on to work with the Kenyan government. Obama said that his father was a proud freedom fighter. Not exactly. He was part of one of the most corrupt and violent governments Kenya has ever had. He says, my family has strong ties to African freedom. Not exactly. He says, your cousin, Raila, I can't even pronounce the name, I'm sorry.
Is it Lulu or something like that?
No, has created mass violence in attempting to overturn a legitimate election in 2007 in Kenya. It is the first widespread violence in decades.
You know, that's the kind of thing the CIA gets mixed up in.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You don't suppose that Barack Obama's father was in the CIA, do you? Yeah, he doesn't sound like a simple goat herder. He said something at the convention.
Well, wait a minute, Olaf. Obama's cousin in Kenya ran for president and tried to get Sharia Muslim law in place there. And when this guy lost the election, his followers burned Christians' homes and then burned men, women, and children alive in a Christian church where they had taken shelter. Obama supported his cousin before the election process here started. Just Google Obama and I'll spell the cousin's name. It's Odinga and see what you get.
Well, that's interesting. Wow. Now, Obama said in his acceptance speech at the Democrat, well, actually, it wasn't at the convention. It was out there in the sports stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you think of him as an athletic figure. Maybe he got confused about that basketball business. I understand Sarah Palin is challenging him to one-on-one basketball thing. Well, anyway. But the thing is that he said that his mother and father had this wonderful dream of him being an American and growing up in America.
Oh, poo-poo.
Yeah, but I thought, well, that doesn't sound like the mother and father that are described in the other reports, who apparently were so radical that they left the United States, were out of the country for over 5 years, and didn't seem to be too friendly with the country and so forth. I'm a little puzzled here. You know, his mother's been described as a radical. Is she? I don't know anymore. I don't know what to believe. You know, there's all kinds of statements out there. I'm not sure, but if Barack Obama thinks that his mother and father were American patriots, then maybe there's a whole other layer to all of this. And maybe instead of being the radical leftist that everybody takes him to be, he's actually the patriot he's now pretending to be. Or maybe he's not the patriot he now pretends to be. Maybe he's secretly a radical leftist Muslim Sharia law guy.
Well, he says, my grandmother has always been a Christian.
Well, his grandmother is not for president.
Terry Anderson says not exactly. She does her daily salat prayers at 5 a.m. according to her own interviews. Not to mention,
she's a Muslim?
Christianity wouldn't allow her to have been one of 14 wives to one man.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Well. This is very suspicious. It's very strange. There's enough things here that John McCain must be holding back a ton of stuff, because I can't believe that he's got a campaign on the lipstick on a pig issue. Okay? I don't think that's the story of this election. The story of the election is just who is Barack Obama? You know, will the real Barack Obama please stand up? And if he does stand up, maybe he should sit down over there, because only citizens are allowed to run. So something's wrong with this picture. If he's a citizen, why doesn't he prove it? He's never actually provided the evidence that he swore the oath of allegiance. There should be some record of that where he could at least tell us where those records are. And I understand that mysteriously some of the records are sealed surrounding his birth and coming into Hawaii and so forth. There's some inability to access these records. So what's going on here? Who could, I don't know, order that to happen? It sounds strange. And, of course, a lot of people are raising these questions. I wish I could say I uncovered all this. I'm just reporting to you what everybody else is saying. But if you haven't heard this, this is what's going on in the talk shows. This is the story that is circulating on the Internet. And yet it's not being reported on ABC, CNN, CBS, Fox News, I guess. I'm not sure if they've covered it either, because I don't get Fox. But I haven't heard it anywhere in the big media outlets. It's one of these underground stories, and this is a big story if this breaks and if he can't produce the right documents. So he has been served officially now, and he does have the legal papers demanding that he prove his citizenship. And so far, we haven't heard any indication that he's responding to this. I don't think he can drag this out until the election. I think he's got to act. He's got to tell people who he really is and prove his birth and so forth. So there's...
Well, birth certificates can be manufactured.
They were. Apparently, there was a fake birth certificate put up on the website, according to the Philadelphia lawyers. If that's the case, not the one that's up there now, he says the original was a fake certificate. So he's worried now as to whether the new one might turn out to be fake as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that are very suspicious here. If they had the real one, why put up a fake one the first time?
Yeah.
Why put up a different birth certificate? I mean, they can't both be correct. One of them is fake. Let's put it that way. And so something's wrong here. Something's wrong with this picture. Clearly, this is a major issue. Everybody's talking about it, but the big news guys, we don't know why. Somebody is keeping ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, whoever, keeping them from addressing this issue. This is a big story. Somebody ought to be covering it. And I don't know why it's not getting covered by the major media. It's only being covered, if you will, underground. Very strange story that ought to be reported on and isn't being. So we do have some CDs that are available. This file's getting pretty long here. We ought to probably wrap it up at this point. And I would mention that if you want to go check out some of our CDs that relate to Mars, we got a whole bunch of stuff on Mars. We have some short, well, not short, but half-hour, 45-minute download files as well that you can get directly right away. And these are all available at the Before 2012 and Beyond.com website. That's all one word, by the way, Before 2012 and Beyond.com, and that's A&D for and there. Before 2012, A&D, Beyond.com. And you'll see over there, if you go in at that level, I know there's a link to the download files, but there's a lot of other stuff that we offer over there as well. They handle our stuff. They'll be handling other people's CDs and so forth shortly as well. There's other stuff coming, I understand. But we were fortunate. We had our stuff ready to go, so we got in early. We brought them some CDs already in MP3 format, and so they started offering those right away. But some of the downloads that are available over there right now are the Hellfire. We got 3 Hellfire downloads. There's 4 on how the church was lost, the history of the early church. If you ever wondered about the history of the early church, we got that over there, and that's just gone up. No Flesh Saved Alive, The Forbidden Fruit of Ultratech. Wait till you hear that one. Just when you thought it was safe to turn on your computer. Is the Shroud Rising Again? There's a Los Alamos discovery and a Dark Night in Turin discussed on that file. And then there's something called the Ultramind, Holy Math, about God's secret coded numbers and the Jerusalem above, the design and structure of the universe. There's 2 files there on that topic. So those are up now, and where does Olaf get all this stuff? It's up there still, too, I understand. Yeah. Basic Secrets, I think, has been taken down. There are some files that are taken down each month as new files are put up. So if you want to check those out, I would certainly advise you to do that. And we got more files, I believe, coming up there this weekend in addition to these. So I don't know if some of these will be taken down when the new ones are put up, but you never know what's going on over there. It's kind of unpredictable. So I suggest you go there frequently, check out the downloads each day and see what's up there. They may change from week to week or month to month. We have tons of downloads coming, and if you purchase at least one download each month, then you will get on the email list for the announcements of the downloads for next month with all kinds of surprise little secret things which I can't tell you about. So that's definitely worth doing. And if you got any interest in Mars at all, we got tons of stuff on Mars. Check it out over there. And at my own website, theTimeQuest.com, I have a lot of free articles there for you to read, including articles on Mars and the Da Vinci Code and all kinds of things. Of course, there's our cancer page, which is reports on the latest discoveries on the subject of cancer that are things that you should eat or not eat, and things like that, and lots of other articles as well. So I've been able to get in there and update it finally. I had a lot of problems with the software conflict that I was running into, but I've finally been able to get back in there, and it has been updated. So you go to the News and Updates page, and you'll see the latest announcements there. And hopefully people will be visiting there on a regular basis as we continue to update it, and especially go to the Before 2012 and Beyond site. Look at the latest downloads and files that are there.
Yeah, you certainly have a tremendously interesting material, Olaf, and very thought-provoking. And I would really recommend that the listeners do go to Before 2012 and Beyond.com and have a look. And you're quite a researcher.
Well, thank you. I've been doing this for over 40 years.
Yes, I know.
And, of course, I started looking through a telescope 50 years ago. But started researching Velikovsky and all of this stuff the decade following that, and the Bible and theology and so forth, taking courses in biblical systematic theology at the graduate level and stuff like that. But I've got a lot of stuff that I studied. Oddly enough, the things, as interesting as the stuff I studied in college was, the only course that I really ever draw upon on a regular basis was the stuff I studied on, two of them, formal ethics and formal logic. Those are the two that I really find were the most useful. If you ever get a chance, if you're going back to college, you get a chance to take a course on formal logic, take it. believe me, the study of logic is something that people really need to do.
You better research who's teaching it first.
Well, the rules of logic are pretty straightforward. There's a mathematical form, which I took, and also a form in philosophy, the philosophy of formal logic.
Well, there's a lot of wackos in the universities and the colleges today, Olaf. That's why I said that.
But,
you know.
Maybe I should do a CD or a tape or...
Yeah, that would be great.
Never done that. Never thought to do that. But that's something people really need to study, is how you reason logically, because so much of, I get lots of emails from people, if they just knew the rules of logic, they would never have come to these conclusions.
Yeah.
These kinds of questions. Learning how to think properly is one of the fundamentals of being able to do good research.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of being brainwashed. It's, in the Middle Ages, for heaven's sakes, they had schools on logic.
Oh, my goodness, they had an ancient Greek schools of philosophy.
But nowadays, everybody's inside Plato's cave going, ooh,
Well, this is the problem. I mean, we can't get into a discussion of that now. We're way over our time.
Oh, but we will. Olaf, God bless you, and all the listeners out there. Olaf and I have a lot of fun with these audio files. Anyway, we'll be back, God willing. We've got an endless lineup of topics to talk about with Olaf. So God bless every one of you that's listening. Good night.